This is going to be a little bit of a different one from my usual. This is not an essay. It's not an analysis. It's not a review. I've already done that. This, it's on the website, by the way. I actually put a little bit of extra effort into it on the review page, so you can see FF14 as a whole, and then ARR, and then Heavensward, and then Stormblood, and then Shadowbringers and Endwalker, and they're easily sortable, and you can see their individual scores and the individual points for each on separate documents if you want to go and see that. Without spoilers. So, ooh. But yeah, so this is a little bit different. Because FF14 is a hell of an animal. And again, like I said, I've already done the actual, the in-depth meat. I actually have some notes down here, so if you see me glancing down periodically, that'll be why. Obviously, I've been a Final Fantasy fan for a long time, ever since 4, I would say, although I've played them since 1. And I will say that I agree with the overall consensus. This is a Final Fantasy game that happens to be kind of an MMO. It is one of the most aggressively anti-co-op MMOs I've ever played, but at the same time, nevertheless, really, really encourages group community interaction. It's such a strange and bizarre game. And again, I'm not going to go in depth in details because this is not an essay, this is not a review, this is not an analysis. I've already done that. However, well, I know most of you do not have the time to sit and watch like however many hundreds of hours the FF14 review actually is. If I might make a recommendation, the very, very, very first episode, episode 1 of the FF14 review, is just me sitting in Limsa Lominsa talking about FF14 1.0. Please go watch that. It's about an hour and a half. And I know that's long, but trust me when I say there's a reason. I couldn't get it any shorter than that. That is me going extraordinarily in-depth into exactly what FF14 1.0 is and why it's the worst game that has ever been made. Now, having said all of that, I just lost like 3 viewers. Having said all of that, FF14 has a really, really brilliant story. It is obviously one of the greater hallmarks of the game. In fact, I actually have the audit page up here right now in the background, because I've always found that, well, the score, the more you zoom in, the more you can get more info. For example, I could say that FF14 has a story score of plus 477. Now, that's huge! But it doesn't really sell the picture, right? Because ARR only had a plus 8. But then Heavensward had 56, Stormblood had 44, Shadowbringers had 170, and Endwalker had 199. A relative increase, and yet, even that doesn't get across the full idea. For example, the brickwork didn't get till Endwalker, but the characters got good in Heavensward. Cinematics and cutscenes were best in Shadowbringers, but moments were best in Endwalker. And the MSQ probably peaked in Shadowbringers, whereas the primary optional content peaked, I'm looking at here, also in Shadowbringers, but was actually surprisingly good in ARR and Heavensward as well. And the secondary quests actually managed to be good in only one of the expansions, Endwalker, and so forth and so on. I'm not going to bore you with all these details. It's all available on the audit standard sheet, which is a publicly available document, if you're really interested in the total breakdown. But my point is, the story overall, the story, if you've ever heard me define it, story is everything, right? Not the plot, but the overall aspect of story, visuals and animations and cutscenes and characters and world building and plot and sequencing and pacing and all the many, many categories that I have pretty detailed in another video that I cover when it comes to story. It's really solid, right? So it is an aggressively linear game, an aggressively linear story. In my opinion, too much so, to the point where I do consider it to be to the game's detriment. You have to go so far into the MSQ, the main story content of this game, in order to be able to even unlock certain aspects of game mechanics or game design, or accessing a vendor, or being able to go to another town. These are all specific examples, by the way. None of these are made up. It's a little bit silly how ridiculously aggressively linear it is. Try to imagine for a moment playing WoW, which you may or may not know. But if you do know WoW, try to imagine being forced to go through all of vanilla, every zone in vanilla, regardless of your level, until you finished off, probably Eastern Plaguelands would be the last one you do, and then being forced to go to BC and doing every zone, including the stuff in the Sunwell, and then being forced to do Wrath and do every zone, culminating in Halion, and then going to Cataclysm, and you get the idea. That's how FF14 is structured. Now, there's obvious benefits to that. There are ways in which the game, it does build up, and build up, and build up, and build up. It allows the game to establish many, many, many things, and it allows it to take its time in doing so. It allows the game room to breathe. And the very BioWare way that they do cutscenes, it makes it so that they can put together a fairly large amount of cutscenes in a fairly short amount of time relative to the development cycle. So that's easy for them to shove more story into each major content patch. So each content patch still has MSQ regardless of what other additional content it adds, which is really nice. And I like the overall structure of how they do their patch cycles. And however, you heard me hesitate earlier when I'm talking about how great the story is. I would be remiss if I did not mention how bad the story is, too. There's plenty of really bad characters, awkward and usable cutscenes. The dialogue, it can be terrible at times. The game got a grand total of 22 empty text negatives. If you've not heard me use that term before, empty text is exactly what it sounds like. We coined the term during Persona 5. It's when someone uses a lot of words to say nothing. If I tell you that I am thinking about preparing to maybe engage as of a point in time which might come soon in order to go ahead and exodus, in order to try and definitely leave towards the destination that I myself very much want to go to, and I'm pretty sure you do as well. Therefore, we will both be able to keep going towards this destination, at least relatively soon, if you're amenable to this thing. Or if I say, are you good to go? You can see the difference between these two sentences. And I should mention this is a very well localized game. I can't just blame this on Japanese writing or anything like that. The English localization team is very legit for FF14. But there is an inordinate quantity of empty text. I'll never forget, I was running a friend of mine through the quest chain leading up to the Crystal Tower. And it got to the point where they got so mad, they started skipping through dialogue because they didn't care. And I decided to go ahead and just summarize for them, here's the story of events leading up to the raid. And they were like, well, that took you like 2 sentences. And I was like, yeah, that's all that happens. Not much is going on right now. So there is a lot of padding on the story, which is appropriate because there is also a lot of padding on the gameplay. This game does not respect your time at all. It's the nicest way I could put that. It demands an inordinate time commitment. This is a game that a friend of mine has spent 90 hours in and has not left ARR yet. That's not an exaggeration. They actually put the game down. I'll get to that later. But, yeah, it is an absolutely inordinately colossal time commitment. However, they're really good about paying attention to their plot beats and their story threads. If something happened at any point in time, there is a very, very high chance that it will pay off at some point in the future. I'll use a specific example. There's a plot thread that I just went through in a quest that just came out either 4 or 8 months ago. I'm not sure the timing. So very, very recently. Or sorry, no, I guess that would be, actually, I'm sorry, 2 or 6 months ago, sorry. And that plot thread is from ARR launch. Not the patch content, but when ARR went live. I meant to look this up, sorry. I'm doing these recordings during I'm supposed to take a break time. So instead of breaking, I'm recording these. So I'm a little bit flustered. I apologize for being terrible at my job. ARR. Hang on a second. Let's look this up. ARR. Where's our timeline? Please give me the timeline. Here we go. Okay, so August of 2013. Yeah, so about 11 years ago, they established a plot thread which was followed through on either 2 or 6 months ago. I am not exaggerating that at all. That is FF14 in a nutshell. I love continuity, and that is a very, very heavy way in which they absolutely follow that type of continuity rather thoroughly. Of course, this does lead to another downside. Now, this is not bragging, but I have the kind of memory for that. My mother usually calls it Trivial Pursuit brain. It's how I'm able to do things like lore runs and ruminations with a minimal amount of notes, is because I just tend to remember those kind of things. Not everyone's like that. That's not a judgment, that's not an elitism, that's not a pride, that's just we're all wired differently. I actually have a bit of advice on this, though. If you are committed to this, if you're ready to devote the next several hundred hours of your life towards playing through this game, take notes. I'm not joking. have a notepad, or have a literal, have a text document, or have physical notepad. Take notes. I'm dead serious. So use a spreadsheet. Use a Word document. Doesn't matter. Characters, world building stuff, setting stuff, like locations and rules of how magic works are really important. Maybe concepts, that kind of stuff. History, that's a big one, like the major wars, the major events. Take notes. It will help so much, I swear. Because I actually know, this is true. This isn't just me coming up out of nowhere. I actually know several people who have done exactly that, who have taken notes as they've been progressing through the game, and that's been helping tremendously. Don't even delete your notes, because it'll be interesting to look back and see what you were thinking at the time compared to how things ended up developing. I should mention this game has a whole lot of what I usually call consequence storytelling, which refers to when things happen logically as a result of consequences. Something happens and then something happens because of that. Because this, therefore this, as I'm sure some of you are aware of that concept. So there's a lot of that. So note-taking can absolutely help with that. And before I finish talking about the story, I want to say one other thing. If there's one thing this game nails better than anything else, it is moments. No spoilers, or, out of context spoilers. But how many of you can think of, like, just right off the top, at the moment I said that, you can think of a moment in this game that absolutely shines for you? I can think of a dozen or so off the top of my head. But if I had to pick one in particular, I'd probably pick Matsya in Endwalker and his run. And again, no context, so you don't know what that means. But if you know, then you know. I would also mention the little things. That's a good one too. But point being, moments is kind of how this game lives and breathes. And that's a good way to segue into the gameplay. Because is this a good game from a gameplay axis? Yes, asterisk. Yeah, we're going to give an asterisk to that. Let me mention the final scores here. So, the gameplay at the end was plus 258. That's really solid. Half of that was Endwalker. Realm Reborn was negative 25. Heavensward was plus 13. Storm's Blood, which is effectively the Cataclysm of FF14, is plus 32. Shadowbringers is plus 49. And Endwalker is plus 118. But again, as I just mentioned earlier, I like to zoom in a little bit more. So let me pull up the gameplay tab. I have so many spreadsheets. And I could look at all sorts of stuff here. I could look at, there's a couple of positives here and there for like camera and choices and co-op and some core mechanics, some core combat, enemy design, basic stuff, leveling, grinding, interface. But really, there are two things which the entirety of the gameplay sits on. Oh, by the way, just as a really fun little anecdote, I gave 27 padding negatives to this game. I'm telling you, doesn't respect your time. But there's two things which the game sits on, which absolutely elevates its gameplay. And sometime around Stormblood, I think they realized that that's what they were good at designing and just honed in on it, and that was probably the right call. Those are class design and boss design. If I look at the boss designs here, there's a very linear progression. Back in, if I could find it, back in ARR, there were only 14 boss positives and 5 negatives. In Heavensward, it went up to 19 and 5 negatives. In Stormblood, it jumped up to 36 with only 2 negatives. In Shadow, it jumped up to 40 with 8 negatives. And then in Endwalker, it jumped up to 60 freaking 4 boss positives with only 2 negatives. Boss design is amazing in this game, and it is absolutely one of the selling points of the game. But of course, the other thing is the class design. Now, this is another asterisk, and I need to give an asterisk here. Because, so the class design starts out with 5 positives and 6 negatives in ARR, so that's 1 to 50. It goes up to 7 and 1, then 9 and 3, then 23 and 2, and then finally 32 and 1 in Endwalker. And that shows the progression of class design in a nutshell. So for those of you who don't know how this works, you pick a class, you level it. Each class has their own level, but all classes can be done on a single character. But a lot of the class design is basically tacked on to what it used to be. So in some cases, the 1 to 50 experience hasn't really changed in years upon years. And so 1 to 50 sucks on most of the classes, to be very, very blunt about that. there's a common saying amongst the community that I've heard many times that most classes don't get good until a certain point. Let me walk that sentence back. All classes don't get good until a certain point. When that point is varies. Black Mage takes to like 80, I want to say. Dragoon takes like 70-something. Reaper is 70-something. You know, 70-something is a pretty common one. There are two very noteworthy exceptions to this. That would be Monk and Summoner, both of which received a major overhaul relatively recently, and, lo and behold, are designed with modern, Endwalker level class design, even for the 1 through 50. So, if you want to pick up this game, I highly recommend starting off as an Arcanist or a Pugilist, because that'll allow you to play one of those two classes. But, thing is, that still means slogging through a lot of crap to get to the good, and that beautifully leads to my overall point. Do I recommend this game? It's trickier to recommend FF14 than any other game I've covered. Because there's no try it out, right? If you come to me and say, Lore, I want to see if I like Mega Mans, I'll say, go play Mega Man 4. If you say, Lore, I want to see if I like, Final Fantasy, I'll say, go play Final Fantasy 4. On Steam, PC easy mode. If you say, Lore, I don't know if I like Star Trek, I say, go watch the first episode of Season 3 of TNG. If you like that, then you like Star Trek. I have prepared answers that I have thought out and planned out in advance for getting most people into a particular franchise or a particular setting or whatever, to see if they actually like something. Because there's lots of options for that. There's no trying out FF14. Oh, I know, you're going to repeat the trial meme, and that's cool and all. And the trial is very, very good on FF14. You can play all the way through, I believe, Stormblood as of this recording, without actually paying a penny for the game, which is good. Because remember, you still have to go through ARR. You have to go all the way through ARR in order, linearly, on classes that aren't really all that great, unless you're playing one of two classes, which nothing tells you those are the good ones, except for me telling you it right now. I'm not even getting into queue times or other problems like that. In other words, there's no there's no finding a seminal moment and saying, do I like this or not? There's just putting up with it and seeing if you like it. Which brings me to my next bit of advice. Actually, I have 3 pieces of advice. I just noticed in my notes. First piece of advice: bring a friend. I know I mentioned that this game is aggressively anti-co-op, and I meant it. But having a friend there, even just in chat or physically present to you, to just talk and chat and make fun of the game with, really, really makes ARR a lot more endurable, and it helps you to get to the actual good stuff. And yes, I know the old argument, the game gets good eventually, is not a really good argument, and it's not. But it is also true. The game does get good eventually. It is a very, very good game at a certain point. Second piece of advice. Again, stick with the trial until you reach a point where you're actually committed to the game. I'm going to give you a little tidbit. I've been playing FF14, well, I played 1.0, obviously, but I've been playing ARR since it came out, off and on. And I quit FF14, I don't remember how many times, like 5 or 6 times over the course of it. I didn't finally actually commit to the game and actually put it into one of my regular MMOs for regular replay or regular forward playing until Shadowbringers, which is not that long ago. It's just 2 expansions ago, counting the current one. That's how long it took for the game to finally hook me. So keep that in mind. Now, obviously, I'm different than you, and I'm not trying to say that that's, when the game finally gets good. I'm just saying everyone has a different moment when the game finally hooks them, and it's usually reasonably far into the game, which brings me to my final point. Do not be afraid to quit the game. Don't think you're obligated. Don't think you're slogging through it. You're just going to build resentment in yourself. Just be willing to put the game down for a few months or years, and keep the account info, because you might want to go back sometime once you've had a break from all of the slog and think, I want to try it again. Almost everyone I know, and I mean this sincerely, who plays this game extensively at this point in time, has gone through this exact same thing. As I mentioned, I quit the game like 6 or so times on my way to Shadowbringers. My friend Pax quit it like 3 times. My friend Bregman quit it like at least twice that I know of. We all quit the game at certain points because the game doesn't respect our time, and it takes a while to get good, and it kind of sucks early on. So don't be afraid to. Don't be afraid to put the game down and say, you know what? I'm good. Let's not force ourselves through it. Let's not drag ourselves through it. Just let it pause. It's free anyways. It's a trial, right? Let's just let it pause. And if you feel like going back to it and continuing to push through it later, cool. And if not, that's fine too. I think that's basically everything. It's just such a weird game to discuss and talk about. FF14 is our only current MMO, of which we intend to have 2. We might have 3. What I mean by that is I've reviewed all of FF14 at this moment, and that means FF14 is now set up for the launch patch cycle. What that means is when Dawn Trail comes out later this year, we will very likely be doing a review of that when it goes live up to the end of the launch content. Then we'll put the game down for probably about 2 years until all the patch content is out for Dawn Trail. Then we'll review all the Dawn Trail, the patch trail content, just like we just did with Endwalker. That's the review we just finished. And then we'll wait until the next expansion comes out and we'll do the launch. You get it? And that's going to be the MMO cycle going forward for FF14 and WoW, and possibly Guild Wars 2, maybe ESO, but that one's much more penciled in, and that's going to be our cycle. I hope you've enjoyed my terrible, terrible thoughts. This is something of a closing statement on my coverage of FF14, because I've covered FF14 a lot. So, for what it's worth, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.